I had just finished brewing a fresh pot of coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from my cousin, Lisa. Hey, emergency trip. Kids at your place. Love you. Will call soon. I frowned at the screen, confusion prickling my spine. Kids? What kids? And then, as if on cue, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was greeted by two small figures, Lisa's twin boys, Ethan and Noah, wide-eyed and bundled up in jackets too big for their tiny frames. Behind them, a taxi driver stood, arms crossed, clearly waiting for a tip. Ma'am, they said this was the address. He motioned to the boys' suitcases. Dropped 'em off just like their mom asked. I was too stunned to respond. Lisa and her husband, Mark, had barely mentioned any vacation plans. And now, without so much as a phone call, they had dumped their 5-year-olds on my doorstep like a last-minute Amazon delivery. The taxi driver gave me a pointed look. I muttered a thank you, handed him a few bills, and then turned my attention to the twins, who were staring at me expectantly. Aunt Claire, Ethan chirped, Mommy said you'd take care of us while they go on their grown-up adventure. I clenched my jaw, exhaling through my nose. Oh, did she? I stepped aside to let them in, my mind already racing. Lisa and Mark had always been selfish, but this? This was something else. As I shut the door behind them, I forced a smile. Well, I said, kneeling down to their level, I guess we're going to have a fun time together, aren't we? But in the back of my mind, a much darker thought was forming. Lisa and Mark would be back. And when they were, I was going to make sure they regretted ever thinking they could pull something like this. By the time the twins had settled in, my nerves were already fraying. I wasn't the type to shy away from responsibility, but watching two 5-year-olds with no warning and no instructions? That was a different beast entirely. First came dinner. I offered them spaghetti, which seemed safe enough, until Noah started sobbing because the sauce touched his noodles, and Ethan refused to eat unless the cheese was the kind that melts like magic. Then came bedtime. Aunt Claire, I need my nightlight. Ethan whined. I can't sleep without my turtle. Noah added, clutching his empty arms. Great. Their parents had packed them up in such a rush, they hadn't even sent their comfort items. I spent the next hour trying to soothe them, reading story after story, until they finally dozed off. By then, I was exhausted. Collapsing onto the couch, I checked my phone. Still no word from Lisa. I considered calling her, but something told me she wouldn't answer. She had gone on vacations before, leaving the boys with our grandmother or a babysitter. But never like this. This wasn't just selfish. This was deliberate. And I was beginning to think they hadn't just forgotten to ask me. They had avoided it. As I stared at the ceiling, a slow, simmering anger began to take root in my chest. Lisa and Mark would waltz back home, tanned and refreshed, expecting me to have played the perfect caretaker. But I had other plans. And they wouldn't see it coming. The next morning, I woke up to tiny fingers poking my forehead. Aunt Claire, we're hungry, Ethan whispered dramatically. I groaned, rolling over to check the time, 6:12 a.m. I had barely gotten 4 hours of sleep. Can't you sleep a little longer? I mumbled. Noah giggled. Nope. Mommy says early birds get the best worms. I forced a smile. Well, lucky for you, I don't serve worms for breakfast. How about pancakes? That got a cheer from both of them. As I shuffled into the kitchen, my phone finally buzzed. A message from Lisa. Hope the boys aren't too much trouble. You're a lifesaver. We just landed, Mexico is beautiful. Call soon. Zoxo. My jaw clenched. No apology. No thank you for doing this last minute. Just a breezy update about their tropical getaway while I wrangled two energetic 5-year-olds with zero warning. I considered responding right away, something scathing, something that would at least make her feel guilty. But then I stopped. Lisa and Mark weren't worried about my reaction. They weren't concerned about how this affected me. They assumed I would deal with it. And that was when my plan really started to take shape. I smiled down at the twins, who were happily pouring way too much syrup onto their pancakes. "Hey, boys," I said sweetly, "how would you like to do something extra special for Mommy and Daddy when they get back?" They both lit up instantly. "Like a surprise?" Ethan asked excitedly. "Exactly," I said, already imagining the real surprise that was coming. Lisa and Mark thought they could dump their responsibilities on me and escape consequence-free. They were wrong. For the next few days, I played the role of the perfect aunt. I took Ethan and Noah to the park, let them eat ice cream before dinner, and even set up a pillow fort in the living room so they could have a camping night. Every time Lisa texted, usually something short and carefree like "hope the boys are behaving." "Poolside margaritas are amazing." Face blowing a kiss, I replied with a cheerful "everything's great." "They miss you." And I meant it. They did miss her. Every night before bed, they asked when she was coming home. And every time, I smiled and said, "Soon." But soon wasn't soon enough for them. Or for me. I wasn't just watching her kids, I was observing them. Their habits, their quirks, the little things that made them tick. And with every passing day, my plan took clearer shape. Lisa and Mark had left without a second thought, assuming I'd handle everything. Now, I was going to make sure their homecoming was something they'd never forget. So I started preparing. First, I let the twins get really comfortable. I subtly shifted their bedtime later and later. I stopped enforcing the no sweets before noon rule. I let them watch cartoons on full blast without telling them to turn it down. Then, I encouraged creativity. I stocked up on art supplies as paints, markers, glitter. I let them decorate the living room however they wanted. When Noah decided the walls looked too plain, I handed him a brush and didn't stop him. And the best part? They thought it was all part of Mommy and Daddy's special surprise. By the time Lisa and Mark were scheduled to return, their perfect, orderly home would be completely unrecognizable. And when they saw what their little angels had been trained to expect, they'd finally understand what it felt like to have their lives turned upside down. The house was no longer the house Lisa and Mark had left behind. The once pristine white walls now had colorful handprints smeared across them. The living room floor was buried under a layer of blankets, stuffed animals, and toy dinosaurs engaged in an ongoing epic battle, according to Ethan. Glitter had somehow found its way into every corner of the house, no matter how many times I swept. And the boys? They were having the time of their lives. I had slowly reshaped their routines, allowing chaos to seep into their daily structure. Bedtime had become a suggestion rather than a rule. Snacks were freely available at all hours. I never told them no when they wanted to play with something messy or loud. They were reveling in their newfound freedom. Each night, Lisa sent a brief update about her vacation, something about the amazing food, the beautiful beaches, the relaxing spas. Each time, I responded just as casually. "Everything is going wonderfully. The boys are having so much fun." I wasn't lying. But I also wasn't telling her that Ethan now expected ice cream with breakfast or that Noah had developed a habit of jumping on the furniture while singing at the top of his lungs. Lisa and Mark had abandoned their responsibilities. Now, they would return to find those responsibilities had grown into something they could no longer control. I checked the calendar. Only 2 more days until they got back. Time for the final touches. With only 2 days left, I made sure the transformation was complete. The boys were fully adapted to their new way of life. Bedtime had become an afterthought, meals were whatever they wanted whenever they wanted, and their energy levels had skyrocketed. They no longer asked me for permission to do things, why would they, when I had never said no? And the house? It looked like a war zone. Lisa's white couch now had colorful streaks of marker where Ethan had decided to make it pretty. The dining table had become an art studio, covered in dried paint, glue stains, and scattered crayons. Noah had somehow managed to get Play-Doh mashed into the carpet. Their carefully curated bookshelf was now a mountain of torn-out pages because, in their words, books look cooler when they explode. Every room bore the mark of unrestrained childhood chaos. I didn't stop any of it. The only thing left was to ensure that when Lisa and Mark walked through that door, their return would be as shocking as possible. That night, I turned my focus to the final details. First, I let the boys stay up extra late. I didn't tell them it was bedtime until past midnight, knowing full well that an overtired child was far more difficult to handle than a well-rested one. They fought sleep, whined, and threw tantrums, which I soothed with promises of more fun the next day. Then, I made sure their expectations were set. Mommy and Daddy are going to love how much fun we've had, I said with an encouraging smile. And guess what? You can show them all the new things you get to do now. Noah grinned. Like jumping on the couch? Exactly, I said. And remember how we don't have to eat boring food anymore? Ethan nodded excitedly. I want cake for dinner. I ruffled his hair. I bet Mommy will let you. By the time I finally got them to sleep, the house was an absolute disaster. Dishes piled in the sink. Toys and art supplies everywhere. Sticky fingerprints on every available surface. Perfect. The next morning, I got the confirmation text from Lisa. Heading to the airport. See you tonight. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Can't wait. The boys are so excited to see you. And they were. Not because they missed their parents, but because they were about to show them their new world, one where rules didn't exist, structure was meaningless, and they were in charge. Lisa and Mark had left me to deal with their responsibilities. Now, they were about to get them back, amplified 100 times over. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The moment finally arrived. I heard the car pull into the driveway, followed by the sound of luggage wheels scraping against the pavement. Lisa and Mark were home. I barely had time to brace myself before the boys exploded with excitement. Mommy! Daddy! Ethan and Noah screamed, bolting toward the door before I could even get up. Lisa's laughter rang through the house as the front door swung open. There are my boys, she said, arms wide. Mark followed close behind, looking tanned, well-rested, and completely oblivious to what was waiting for them. Ethan threw himself at Lisa, while Noah latched onto Mark's leg. Lisa turned to me, beaming. Claire, you're a saint. I can't tell you how much we needed this vacation. I don't know what we'd do without you. I smiled. Oh, it was no trouble at all. The boys had so much fun. Lisa ruffled Ethan's hair. I bet they did. Then she glanced around the living room, and the smile froze on her face. Her eyes moved from the crayon-covered couch to the pile of stuffed animals and blankets taking over the floor. Then to the dining table, still covered in art supplies. And finally, to the streaks of dried glue on the wall. Mark had just finished putting their suitcases down when he followed her gaze. His mouth fell open slightly. What happened? I tilted my head innocently. Oh, the boys got creative. They wanted to decorate. And, well, they've had such a great time with their new routine. Lisa blinked rapidly. New routine? Ethan, bouncing on his heels, filled in the gaps for her. Aunt Claire lets us have pancakes whenever we want. And we don't have to go to bed early anymore. Noah tugged at Lisa's sleeve, his little face full of excitement. And I made a painting on the wall. Wanna see? Lisa turned back to me, a strained laugh escaping her lips. That's great. Really great. Mark, however, had finally noticed the full extent of the damage. He took a few slow steps forward, his gaze flicking from one disaster to the next. Claire, why didn't you clean any of this up? I shrugged. Oh, I thought you'd want to see how much fun they had. They were so happy, I didn't have the heart to stop them. Plus, I figured you'd want them to keep their new habits, since they're clearly enjoying themselves so much. Lisa's face paled slightly. Right, well, we should probably. She didn't get to finish her sentence. Because at that moment, Noah took off running toward the couch and jumped onto it with all the force his little legs could muster. Lisa gasped. Noah. What, he said, utterly confused by her sudden panic. Aunt Claire lets me do it all the time. Mark's expression darkened as he turned back to me. Claire. I folded my arms. Yes? You didn't actually encourage this, did you? I gave him the same wide-eyed look I had been perfecting all week. Of course I did. I mean, you dropped them off without any warning or instructions. So I assumed you trusted my judgment. And, well, they really enjoyed having more freedom. I just went with what made them happiest. Lisa let out a sharp breath, her hands going to her temples. Okay. We can fix this. We just need to. But Ethan had other plans. He sprinted toward the kitchen and yanked the refrigerator open. I want ice cream, he announced. No, sweetheart, Lisa said, regaining some of her motherly authority. It's almost dinner time. Ethan froze, his face twisting in genuine confusion. But Aunt Claire said we can have whatever we want, whenever we want. Lisa shot me a look that could have melted steel. I simply smiled. You might need to ease them back into things, I said sweetly. They've really gotten used to doing things their own way. Mark rubbed his temples. How bad is it? I gestured toward the hallway. Why don't you take a look around? Mark left to investigate, and a few moments later, I heard his sharp intake of breath when he saw the mess in the other rooms. Lisa looked as though she wanted to scream, but couldn't in front of the boys. This was it. This was the moment they realized. They had expected to return to well-behaved children, a spotless home, and a grateful babysitter. Instead, they had come back to absolute chaos, chaos they had created by assuming they could dump their responsibilities on me without consequences. Lisa swallowed hard. Claire, listen, we really appreciate what you did for us, but... Oh, no need to thank me, I interrupted, my tone light. Really? It was my pleasure. Mark returned, looking shell-shocked. Lisa, he muttered under his breath. The guest room is a disaster. The bathroom? Lisa shot him a look that clearly said, not in front of the kids. The best part was, I hadn't even exaggerated anything. I had simply let nature take its course. The boys had done all of this on their own, fueled by their newfound lack of boundaries. And now, Lisa and Mark would have to undo it. Lisa forced a smile, her jaw tight. Well, I guess we'll just have to get them back on track. I nodded. Oh, I'm sure it won't take too long. I mean, they're just kids. It's not like they'll resist or anything. At that moment, Ethan threw himself onto the floor in protest. I want ice cream. Noah immediately joined in, stomping his feet. I don't want to go to bed early. Lisa's eyes darted between them, her perfect vacation glow fading rapidly. Mark looked like he was already mentally calculating how much of the security deposit they were about to lose. And me? I picked up my purse, adjusted my coat, and grabbed my keys. Well, I said cheerfully, I should be going now. I'll leave you to it. Lisa's head snapped toward me. Wait, you're not staying to help clean up? I barely held back a laugh. Oh, Lisa, I said, shaking my head. I've done more than enough. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but a fresh wail from Ethan stopped him in his tracks. I stepped toward the door, then turned back one last time. Oh, and Lisa? I said with a smile. She looked up, her face exhausted. What? I leaned in slightly. Next time, try asking first. Then I walked out the door, leaving them to the delightful mess they had created. The moment I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp evening air. Behind me, through the closed door, I could already hear the chaos unfolding. Ethan was still demanding ice cream, Noah was arguing about bedtime, and Lisa and Mark were frantically trying to calm them down while also taking in the full extent of the damage. I couldn't stop the small, satisfied smile from creeping onto my face. They had expected an easy return, one where they could swoop in, hug their kids, and resume life as if they had never selfishly abandoned them for a luxury vacation. Instead, they were stepping into a storm of their own making. And the best part? I hadn't done anything they wouldn't have done themselves. I simply gave the boys the same level of care and structure Lisa and Mark had given me when they dropped them off, none. I got into my car and drove home, feeling lighter than I had in days. The exhaustion from the sleepless nights, the constant tantrums, the never-ending mess, it was all their problem now. I didn't hear from Lisa that night. Or the next day. In fact, 3 days passed in complete silence. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. Lisa. I let the call ring twice before answering, keeping my voice casual. Hey, Lisa. There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. Claire, she said, her voice tired in a way I had never heard before. We need to talk. I leaned back on my couch, barely holding back a grin. Oh. What about? Lisa exhaled again. The boys have been a nightmare since we got back. They won't listen, they won't go to bed on time, they think they can eat junk food all day, and Noah, she hesitated, as if saying it out loud made it worse. Noah painted on our bedroom wall last night. With ketchup. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Oh, that's rough, I said, feigning sympathy. Kids do pick up habits quickly, don't they? Lisa groaned. Yes, which is why I was wondering if you could maybe come over and help us get them back on schedule. I almost laughed out loud. She had the audacity to ask me to fix the very problem she had caused. I could have pointed out how she had dumped her children on me without a second thought, how she hadn't cared whether it was inconvenient or stressful for me. But I didn't need to. She already knew. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then, in my sweetest voice, I said, "Oh, Lisa. I'd love to help, but I just can't." She hesitated. Can't? Why not? I sighed dramatically. Oh, you know. Work has been so overwhelming, and I really need a break after watching the boys for so long. I just don't have the energy right now. I could practically hear her gritting her teeth. But I'm sure you can handle it, though, I continued. I mean, you're their parents. Who better to take care of them? There was a long, miserable silence. Then Lisa muttered, "Right. Of course. Glad we agree," I said cheerfully. Anyway, gotta run. Good luck, Lisa. And with that, I hung up. Lisa and Mark had spent years expecting everyone else to pick up the slack, assuming they could always take the easy way out. But this time, there was no easy way out. This time, they had to fix what they had broken. And that? That was the best revenge of all. A week passed before I heard from Lisa again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a text. Claire, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit in the consequences of her actions without the comfort of a reply. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered the sisterly bond we once had, was curious. So I replied. For everything? She answered almost immediately. For dumping the boys on you last minute. For assuming you'd handle it. For not realizing how hard it actually is. I get it now. I leaned back, rereading her words. I had expected frustration. Anger even. Some kind of attempt to deflect responsibility. But this? This was genuine. A minute later, another message came through. They're finally back to normal routines, but it took forever. The first few nights, Mark and I barely slept. Every meal was a fight. Noah had a meltdown over broccoli, and Ethan refused to go to bed unless he had second dessert. Mark lost it when Noah started jumping on the couch again, and I had to explain that they thought it was normal. I don't know how you did it. I should have never put you in that position. I tapped my fingers against my phone, thinking. Finally, I wrote back. You shouldn't have. But at least now you understand. A long pause. Then. Yeah. I do. I didn't reply right away. For the first time in years, I had the upper hand. Lisa had always been the one who breezed through life, relying on the patience and goodwill of others. She assumed people would forgive her, that inconveniences would smooth themselves out, and that she could always find a way to charm her way back into good graces. But this experience had forced her to feel the weight of her own choices. That was enough for me. Lisa wasn't used to cleaning up messes, literal or figurative. But now, she was knee-deep in them. I imagined her and Mark, exhausted, surrounded by piles of laundry, scraping Play-Doh out of the carpet while the boys demanded candy before breakfast. I pictured Lisa forcing a strange smile through gritted teeth as Noah smeared yogurt on the wall, while Mark desperately Googled how to get crayon off furniture in the background. They thought they had escaped responsibility for a week. Instead, they had simply delayed it. A few days later, she called again. This time, her voice was different, softer, more thoughtful. Claire, I know I don't deserve a favor, but if you ever do babysit again, I promise it'll be planned. And fair. No last-minute surprises. And I'll owe you one. A big one. I smiled to myself. Lisa never owed anyone anything. At least, she never thought she did. But now? Now, she understood what it felt like to be on the other side. I let the silence stretch, just for effect. Then, casually, I said, I'll think about it. Lisa let out a small, relieved laugh, but it was laced with something else, humility. For the first time, she wasn't assuming my kindness. She was hoping for it. And that was the moment I knew I had one. Because she finally meant it when she said, Thank you. The end.